Welcome to the War Academy channel. Almost 90 years have passed since the start of the Spanish Civil War in 1936, and despite this, it continues to be a rather difficult subject to tackle in Spain. This is because, as in any civil war, many savage acts were committed between brothers, and many wounds are still open today. Bombings like that of Guernica, or massacres like those of Paracuelos, are still used today as throwing weapons by the heirs of each side, and also by certain political parties. Unfortunately, and like everything in politics today, many of these events end up being discussed in a similar way to the one that fans of a soccer team use when they argue about which soccer team is better or worse, turning the debate into something sterile, lacking objectivity in the search for a common point. All this makes it very difficult for many historians to talk about this matter, since we know that we are going to be continuously in the spotlight, and at the slightest opportunity, we are going to be lynched without any mercy by any vigilante of the absolute truth or thought police. Any Spaniard who is watching this video undoubtedly knows what I am talking about, but I wanted to convey it to the people who see us, mainly from Latin America, who are surely not familiar with the subject, although I am sure that in each of your countries, similar things happen with an issue similar to this that you have had. Next, and once this introduction has been made, we are going to see 5 very striking curiosities of this purely military conflict, without any intention of entering into any political issue, although I am sure that for some, it will be so. The first point that we are going to see is the reason why the Republic forces are not capable of adequately addressing and reacting to the military coup during the first months. And it is that, the first thing that strikes us is that when the Civil War begins, the Republican side has at first glance a much more favorable position, and also has a greater number of troops, resources, and production centers. However, he began to suffer a series of initial defeats, which ended with the arrival of troops from the rebel or national side, in the vicinity of Madrid. This initial debacle was not due so much to the superiority of the rebel side, but to the lack of cohesion of the forces of the government of the Republic. Although it is true that the troops brought by Franco from Africa were the most experienced and best trained in the Spanish army, this was not the fundamental element to explain their rapid initial advance. Keep in mind that when war breaks out, dozens of groups, parties, movements, and organizations of all kinds try to increase their notoriety as much as possible. Groups of anarchists, communists, and socialists, among others, began an internal dispute that led them to not be sufficiently united at first, and this made it impossible for the leaders of the Republic to manage everything. To this, we must also add militiamen of all kinds, who began to be given weapons and who came to act on their own, to the lack of adequate military discipline for being considered as something fascist, the distrust towards many career soldiers, who did not know if they would really be faithful or would go over to the side, and along etc. Manuel Azana himself, President of the Republic, became aware of this fact, and was quite depressed with the situation, even admitting that either they were capable of resolving these internal disputes or the war was lost. Azana or Indalecio Prieto would comment that a war is won with an army, and the Republic, which licensed theirs, had to transform an army, in the midst of a war, made up of the initial undisciplined militias, which could only manage to delay defeat. All analyses suggest that for the Republic, the war had been lost for a long time, but they tried to resist as long as possible in the hope that the war would break out in Europe, and the intervention of France or Great Britain could give the back to the situation. As we will see in the next point, Franco was also interested in prolonging it for other reasons, and due to these 2 reasons, the war continued for much longer. Finally, World War II began about 5 months after the fighting in Spain ended. The next point on the list is one of the most controversial military points of the conflict. This can be presented with the following question. Did Franco lengthen the war artificially, in order to be fully consolidated in power, once it was over? In response to this, there are all kinds of opinions, but the option that it was so seems the clearest. During its development, there were several comments between Hitler and Goebbels who spoke about this issue, these being the following. Franco's progress has stalled again. He obtained small victories, but he does not advance as he should. Was he really the right man for this? Hitler told Goebbels at the beginning of 1937. In other later comments, Hitler would comment that the war in Spain could not continue open during more time, and that was destroying everyone's nerves. In the words of the German leader, it seemed that it was destined to become a war that would last for decades, in which there was no rush to end. Finally, he came to think that Franco was a rather incompetent general. Mussolini was another who despaired with the duration of it, but Franco responded to this through the Italian ambassador Roberto Cantalupo. In mid-1937 he told her, "I can't be in a hurry. If I do not first consolidate the spiritual conquest of the populations behind us, it is not only useless, but even dangerous to advance. It would be very dangerous if I arrived too soon in Madrid, with a military action of great style. First I have to be certain of founding a regime, and of being able to install the capital of the new Spain there." We leave this point here, waiting to analyze the military operations themselves in a live program in the future. The following section refers to a technique that was widely used by the Republican side to conquer enemy positions, in which the national troops were strongly entrenched. And it is that, although during this confrontation some tanks such as the German Panzer I, or the Soviet T-26 were present, the combats were rather similar to those of the First World War. On many occasions, such as during the siege of the Alcázar of Toledo, to try to overcome the enemy defenses, underground tunnels are dug under the enemy's positions, to accumulate explosives and detonate them underground. This causes a huge explosion that makes an entire building go up in the air, and with it all the buildings are devastated. After this, and with all the confusion caused, the Republicans go on the attack and try to take the position. However, due to different factors, such as its easy detection due to the noise of the excavations, this technique was not as effective as expected. This, as you know, is not new to this era, as it was also used to a great extent during the First World War, and even during the Modern or Middle Ages, to break down enemy walls. The fourth section of the program has to do with the terror generated by the Moroccan soldiers that Franco brought from Africa. And it is that, due to the many barbarities and savagery that these troops committed during the first months of the war, a great fear spread among the Republican troops at the time of falling prisoner before them. This element, added to other internal problems that they already had, meant that, when they heard the news that their positions were being overtaken by their enemy, they began to withdraw and disband without putting up much resistance. This was something that the Republican commands made an effort to correct, since an army cannot allow its troops to withdraw on their own, letting themselves be carried away by panic. Due to all this, the hatred towards the Moors by the Republicans was total, and there are many songs and all kinds of slogans that indicate this. And finally, let's go with the fifth point, this being another problem that the Republic had, which prevented it from getting the proper return on the war material it had available. As we mentioned at the beginning, the Republic had a low number of experienced career officers, because either they had gone over to the rebel side, or they were mistrusted because of their military status. This led, for example, to the fact that the Republican Navy did not have adequate command to direct its warships, and this led to naval confrontations in which some battleships, such as the Jamie I, were not able to hit their targets. In the same way, much material that came from the Soviet Union, mainly combat tanks and aviation, had to be driven and piloted by Soviet troops, due to the lack of Spaniards who had the training to do so. Once again, President Manuel Azana left a sentence that perfectly sums up this situation, in which his troops found themselves. If a rancher prevents his battalion from revolting, or a diver from a battleship manages to keep the officers from going over to the enemy, give those men some award, but don't make the rancher colonel or the diver admiral. Well, they won't know how to do it. So we will lose both the battalion and the ship in the next engagement. Well, so far this program in which we have approached this topic, giving a first brushstroke. As I say again, it is a subject that is still very difficult to deal with today, and here we have tried to do it with the greatest respect and rigor possible. What other issues would you like to see discussed? Do you consider that Franco lengthened the war artificially? Do you think that the worst enemy of the Republic, far from being the rebel forces, were its internal clashes? I await your answers in the comment box. Many thanks to everyone, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.